It seems that most of us are moral objectivists or moral absolutists about everything except sex. So I don't know too many people who say everything in moderation, including racism. You know, people are pretty down on racism, as they ought to be. People aren't moral relativists when it comes to insider trading or theft. Like we all have an opinion and we think it's true. When it comes to sex, it seems like it's all now multiple choice.
It's all multiple choice.
Do you agree, and why is that the case?
Well, okay, that's several questions. First, why has this happened? I think the biggest causal influence on this was the invention of the birth control pill. People had a sort of a vague idea before that sex is connected with procreation. Okay? And that's a principle of the natural law too. Sure, the heart is for pumping blood, the mind is for deliberating and knowing the truth, anger is for arousing me to the defense of endangered good, my thumb is so that I can oppose the fingers so as to grasp, sex is for turning the wheel of the generations. But I think once upon a time that wasn't an abstract point to people because they could just see that when you have sex, there are kids. Now you invent this easy pill and they say, oh, we've broken the natural link. We've changed our nature. Well, we haven't actually, because when you try to evade the consequence of fertility, there are other consequences of the attempt to evade the consequences. So now we paradoxically, people said, if we only promote contraception, now that we've invented such an easy means of it, there won't be any more children out of wedlock. There are more. There are more because it changed people's attitudes. They became much more casual about sex. So it's not just that they're having sex and using pills. It's that they're now having more sex in other ways. It's like T.S. Eliot once said in the Four Quartets, one of his poetic works. He said people are dreaming of systems so perfect that no one has to be good. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So we're having this sexual catastrophe and this meltdown. Eventually, the pendulum will swing the other way. But I think it's going to take longer. And there's going to be, a lot more damage before the pendulum swings back. Because in previous days, all right, you become sexually immoral on a widespread basis. And you have all these kids born out of the wedlock and society is going to pieces. But the invention of this new technology has convinced us that we can keep that kind of thing from happening, even though the evidence is in front of us that it isn't. And so it's like pushing that pendulum up, holding it back so that it can't swing back. And eventually the pendulum gets so heavy that it sweeps back with enormous force and smashes things. I would not be surprised if it's going to take that kind of a smash before it swings back this time. I hope not. I hope not, and that's why we have to talk to people still and persuade them. But I think that, this is what's going on, and yet people can, if you talk to people can understand this. At the University of Virginia, there are a lot of family sociologists at my own university. A fellow named Mark Regnerus are studying things about this, and 2 generations ago, some family sociologists were saying, well, if marriages break up and the kid and the parents marry new people or don't marry, the kids will be just as well off.
Yeah. They're resilient is what we told ourselves.
And they're going to be resilient. Yes, they're going to be children are so resilient. It turns out not to be true. The children are wrecked. And they're also less able to form their own marital bonds. They're more disillusioned about it. And eventually the data collects, or the fact that if you've had sexual experience before marriage, you're much less likely to be faithful. Mm-hmm. If you've lived together, cohabited, even if it's the only person you ever had sex with, you cohabit before marriage. People think this is practice for marriage. It's more like practice for divorce, because it's practice in living without a commitment and pretending that you have one. Once in class, I wasn't teaching about sex, but I was teaching something about Plato. And, Plato is all interested in sex, of course, so the sex comes up. And I had learned that if I just lay something on the students, they're not going to appreciate this. And so I said, and this is truthful, I said, I have a lot of compassion for your generation because, my generation invented the sexual revolution. And it was so new that they escaped some of the consequences. And I have a feeling that your generation is paying the price for the dinner that we ordered.
I feel this way when I watch that old show Seinfeld.
Yeah.
I can't watch it without feeling sad because
Yes.
it seems like they're still running off the fumes of a Christian society in which, Jerry's parents are still together. They have uncles and aunts. There's still some kind of Christian bedrock there, but they're spending the inheritance and we're kind of a result of that. And so when I watch Seinfeld, it's very difficult for me to find those sexual jokes and interplays.
I know
humorous.
some of the stuff is funny, and some of it just makes you want to. You say, "Wait,
It's
shouldn't I
sad.
be weeping here?"
Yeah.
Anyway, when I said this in class, a student said, "I know exactly what you mean." I think I was expecting some pushback, but that's not what happened. He said, "I know exactly what you mean." He said, "My parents divorced and they split. And I love them. And I really think the world of them." He said, "And I want more than anything else to fall in love with a woman and marry her and be faithful to her forever." But he said, "But I don't think it's possible."
Mm-hmm.
Because, and you see, he thought his parents were so wonderful, he thought if they couldn't do it, nobody can. They didn't think that they were doing this to him by splitting. But they were. People think that breaking up is an exit. Look, there are some times that people have to separate. The guy's beating you or something. Okay, I understand that. But people think, well, it's just not working out. And they think there's a back door. And sometimes the only way that you can heal what's damaged in your marriage is to close the back door and get serious.
Yeah.
And then you find out, well, hey, we can make this work.
When you were an atheist professor at the University of, Texas?
Texas,
in Austin,
University of Texas at Austin.
I mean, could you have imagined back then if somebody said in 2022 there'd be these fellas cutting off their Johnson and calling themselves women and competing against women and dominating them, and that we'd all celebrate and be told to clap and pretend that this was good and liberating?
I didn't imagine it.
Would you have had a problem with it?
If somebody, well, there's two different senses of having a problem.
Yeah.
There was enough inherited moral residue, even though I told myself that there was no objective good and evil, that a lot of things distressed me. And if somebody had said this to me, I would have been distressed. But I also would have said, but there is no objective reason to object to it. And this is just my distress. I had this sort of a nonsense of a relativism of virtues, that there might be moral communities, coalitions of people who have this interpretation of the virtues, and coalitions of people who have this interpretation of the virtues, and they might really be at war with each other unless you can find some place that they intersect. And I tried to work out a sort of a new sociology based on that kind of thing. And so yes, I could imagine genocides and all kinds of things, and they may have distressed me, but that was different than saying, and I can tell you what's wrong with it.
Yeah. Where do you see this going then? Because
what's this?
The sexual revolution, if you want to call it that. The effects of the.
I see the crash.
Is it crashing now? Because this transgenderism stuff is a relatively new thing. Where else are we going before?
Well, yeah, but it is an aspect of the crash. I mean, look, if you can't even tell if you're a man or a woman anymore,
or what a man or woman is,
imagine we've now reached a point in which people can aspire to the highest offices in the land and say, but I don't know what a man and a woman is. This is flabbergasting. It is flabbergasting. By the way, I think that one has to talk about this with compassion. I understand that people are confused about this. They are confused about who they are, about what they are, and they're in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And they imagine that if I only get this cut off, if I only have this sewed on, if I only start dressing this way, if I start presenting as a woman or presenting as a man, and convince myself that that's what I am, I will be happy. And what the research shows is that no, they aren't happy. All the problems that they had before persist. Sometimes they're worse. Sometimes then they say, how could I have done this to myself?
I think that's a good point. We have to distinguish the anger we rightly feel at the propaganda being directed at us from big government and Hollywood and big tech, and then distinguish that from the suffering people who are confused because they live in a broken sexual society.
The most conspicuous thing that I see when I look at the sexual landscape is suffering.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.